Hello all, and thank you to the IFFTI organisers for having us today. We're sorry to not be with you all there in person in Vietnam, but very happy to be at least presenting in this format on screen with you. We also want to thank our students for their input into this research paper. Our presentation today summarises findings from our paper titled Thinking Through Making, Material-Driven Design Pedagogies in Postgraduate Fashion Craft Education. The paper examines and refines pedagogical practice from within the teaching context. Both researchers are faculty in the MA Fashion Artifact course at London College of Fashion, University of the Arts, London. That is my colleague, Dr. Lara Torres, Senior Lecturer on MA Fashion Artifact, and myself, Naomi Filmer, Course Leader for MA Fashion Artifact. Across fashion education, increasing calls for ecological responsibility and decolonial reform have prompted a re-examination of how fashion design is taught, learnt and valued. These shifts challenge the dominance of Eurocentric product-orientated pedagogies, advocating for more relational, situated and responsible modes of learning that foreground material agency, local knowledge and social justice. In response to this framework, our research asks, how can multidisciplinary material-led practice-based pedagogies facilitate ecologically responsive learning in a postgraduate fashion education? Established in 2007, the MA Fashion Artifact course at London College of Fashion is committed to the exploration, the questioning, and reimagining of objects and product that hold personal and cultural meaning within contemporary fashion practice. The course offers a distinctive environment for investigating material-led design practices. So within this framework, thinking through making operates not only as a pedagogical method, but also as an epistemological stance, a way to gain knowledge through material dialogue. Students are encouraged to engage with material agency, to focus on material behaviours, allowing discovery, failure and serendipity to guide creative developments.
Our study draws on 5 intersecting frameworks. New materialism positions materials as active participants in the design process. Material-driven design places material engagement at the origin of form. Craft theory is central, understanding making as a form of thinking, where knowledge emerges through skilled embodied practice and dialogue with materials. Situated knowledge reminds us that this learning is always contextual and embodied, and an ethics of care reframes sustainability as a relational practice grounded in attentiveness and responsibility. Together, these perspectives move pedagogy beyond anthropocentric product-driven models towards more relational, material-led, and ecologically responsive approaches. This study adopts a qualitative action research methodology, which allows us to examine and refine pedagogical practice from within the teaching context itself. Action research combines theory and practice, enabling researchers and participants to collaboratively reflect on lived experiences and learning processes. In our case, it allowed us to investigate how material-led studio practices shape learning, while also reflecting critically on the pedagogical environment in which these practices occur. Our primary qualitative method was focus group discussion, involving 3 current students and 4 alumni across 3 different cohorts of the MA Fashion Artifact course. We developed a series of open-ended prompts designed to encourage participants to reflect on their experience of material experimentation, studio learning, and collaborative exchange. The focus groups were recorded via video and audio, allowing us to capture detailed reflections on how material-led processes influence creativity, student confidence, and ecological awareness in the studio. The focus group recordings were transcribed and analyzed using reflexive thematic analysis following Brown and Clark. We first generated codes related to participants' experiences of material engagement, studio learning, and pedagogical transformation. These codes were then developed into broader thematic patterns, and finally, we conducted a cross-group comparison between current students and alumni to understand how these learning experiences evolved over time.
The findings from the first focus group reveal a clear shift in students' design approaches. Most participants explain that before joining the MA, they would work with prefixed ideas, then sourcing materials to fit the concept. But on MA Fashion Artifact, working through material-led pedagogies, they shifted to a material-first approach. Students began by engaging with materials, allowing their inherent behaviours, resistances and affordances to guide both creative and construction decisions. Materials disrupted student assumptions. They demanded attention and redirected intentions. In this sense, material became an epistemic partner, not treated simply as passive substance, but instead it actively shaped knowledge through the process of making. And in this way, students were not only designing with materials, but also learning from them. The knowledge emerged through the dialogue between maker and material. This is evident in Chuchi's work here, where she merges plant, animal, and metals into single forms without external bonding agents or connection elements. Through the process of careful crafting this material fusion, she learns about their differences as matter, but also of their contrasting origins. Chuchi reflects, rather than imposing my concept onto the material, I let it speak its own story. She describes materials as older than herself, positioning them as temporarily deep and agentic. Making for her becomes a kind of intergenerational dialogue. And I quote, "It's more like we work together and create something together. I'm only 23 years old, but some of the materials, they're much older than me." Chuchi also notes that organic materials resist control. They warp, absorb, and transform unpredictably during the making and in response to environment. In this way, the material becomes a teacher, requiring the designer to slow down, to listen, to watch, and note. She describes approaching materials by temporarily forgetting what she already knew and encountering them as if for the first time. A similar shift appears in the second focus group. Carrie describes how materials talk back through unpredictable behaviours. She initially experimented with spiky, jagged surfaces as a way to invite touch, but they had the opposite effect and people avoided them. However, when these accumulated prickly components collided in movement, she discovered they produced a rattling sound. Rather than correcting that sound, she followed it. This redirected the project towards a sensory exploration of sound rather than touch, and this led her research towards ritual and shamanic objects. As she explains, that sound became really interesting. The materials themselves guided me to a completely new idea. This shift reveals a significant pedagogical insight. When students engage in open-ended material-led experimentation, materials themselves can redirect the trajectory of the project. Here we share an extract of Carrie Wu's film showing the performance of one piece from her final collection of body shakers to demonstrate the material sound instigated by movement.
Participants consistently describe thinking through making as central to their learning. Iterative cycles of experimentation, reflection, and remaking enable them to translate abstract ideas into tangible form. Chiu's work with leather and bamboo illustrates the shift toward co-creation with the materials. It described how the tension and flexibility of both materials allowed him to bend, stretch, and stitch them while exploring body and form. Through making, unexpected behaviors emerged. When he began weaving the leather, the structure gradually opened and loosened, and the material itself seemed to, as he explained, give the answer. This reflects how making becomes a dialogic process where testing, failing, and refining generate new insights. For Chiu, material engagement was explicitly rooted in family heritage. And I quote, "From my grandma and going to my dad's generation, they're both working with bamboo," he explained, framing his project as a continuation of an ancestral craft lineage. He says, "This is part of my DNA. I wanted to see what kind of things bamboo could make." Chiu's MA experience expanded this family's legacy beyond furniture making into contemporary fashion artifacts, blending traditional hand skills with fabrication processes such as leather wet molding and airbrushing. Yoon described a turning point in her project when she began working with traditional Korean fabrics such as mosi and oksa. Earlier experiments did not communicate the cultural meaning she was trying to express, highlighting how material choice shapes meaning. When she sourced these materials directly from Korea, her process shifted towards slower craft-based techniques, including the use of rice glue instead of industrial stiffeners. This shift reconnected the work to Korean heritage and demonstrates how material provenance can guide both aesthetic and conceptual development. Material choice became a medium for exploring identity, heritage, and ecological ethics. Several participants described working with culturally or environmentally meaningful materials as a way to reconnect with ancestry, local craft traditions, and ecological awareness. In this context, materiality becomes a language of belonging and a site of ethical negotiation. For example, Yoon's use of traditional Korean fabrics reconnects her work to embodied heritage. Here, sustainability is understood as a practice of care, slow, attentive, and relational, aligning with care ethics and post-human perspectives on material vitality.
Sakshi's collaboration with Channapatna artisans in India offered a powerful shift in how she understood sustainability. Working with locally sourced wood and natural lacquer, the artisans demonstrated a cyclical approach to making, where offcuts were not discarded but reworked into new objects. This reframed waste for Sakshi as a continuation of material life rather than its end. Through this encounter, sustainability emerged not as a technical solution, but as a culturally embedded practice of care and resourcefulness. Her experience reflects a broader relational ecology, what Braidotti describes as a Zoe-centered ethics, where making becomes an act of stewardship. Here, materials, makers, and environments are interconnected, and design operates as a form of co-responsibility within a living system. Across both focus groups, students emphasized that learning did not happen in isolation. Relationships with peers, technicians, and artisans were central to the processes. Through sharing techniques, discussing failures, and observing each other's experiments, knowledge circulated horizontally across the studio. In this sense, the studio functioned as an ecology of learning, what Tim Ingold describes as an education of attention. So where collaboration, care, and material experimentation generate collective forms of knowledge.
This study analyzed how material-led practice-based pedagogies can transform fashion education by repositioning materials as active collaborators rather than passive resources. In doing so, it responds to our research question, how such approaches can facilitate ecologically responsive learning in postgraduate fashion education. We found that this responsiveness emerges through iterative embodied engagement with materials, where knowledge is generated through touch, resistance, and dialogue. Students move away from predetermined conceptual approaches towards processes of discovery where materials actively shape decisions and outcomes. Crucially, this process cultivates a shift in attitude from control to attentiveness and from extraction to respect. Engaging with materials in this way means recognizing their histories, life cycles, and agencies, and understanding material practice as part of a broader ecological system. In this sense, ecologically responsive learning is not delivered just as content, but enacted through practice. It is embedded in how students learn to relate to both materials and others. And ultimately, this material-led pedagogy prepares students not just for professional practice, but for a mode of design grounded in care, responsibility, and respect. This is our bibliography for this paper, in case you are interested to have a look at. And we would like to thank you for listening today, and we welcome all of your questions.
Thank you.